Welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of Wednesday, November 12th, 2014. I'm Councilmember Mike Bonin, the chair. I am joined today by my colleagues, Mr. Paul Koretz of the 5th District and Mr. Paul Krikorian of the 2nd District. First of all, let's start, as is custom here, with our multimodal roll call. Since last time we met, who has commuted to work by bicycle? All right, we got 4, and 3 of them are entirely predictable. Jessica Meany, Eric Bruins, and Salita Reynolds. How about by bus? Okay, same hands. And my hand on that one. How about by train? All right, much better. And who's getting to work by foot? Who actually lives and works close together? All right, well, clearly we need more housing in Los Angeles, closer to employment centers. So we have our regular agenda and a special agenda, which we'll get to in just a minute. We will, first of all, let me suggest some items for consent and see if my colleagues concur. I was going to recommend items 2, 3, 4, and 8 from the regular agenda for consent.
Committee members, item 3 is an ordinance from the city attorney. A new ordinance was submitted to our office. It's dated November 3rd. Do you wish to approve that ordinance and to receive and file the ordinance dated September 24th?
Yes.
Thank you.
I actually have one quick question on that.
On item 3?
On 3, yeah.
All right, so we'll move on consent items 2, 4, and 8. And is it 2:15? Can I start the special?
Not yet.
Not yet? All right, you're a buzzkill, Mr. Okay, so let us begin with item number 1 and report from the General Manager of the Department of Transportation. And before you start, we actually have 2 speaker cards. One is from Dennis Hinman and the other from Mark Jolies. Item number 1. Go ahead, Dennis.
Hi, my name is Dennis Hyman. There's two issues I have. One is there's a East San Fernando Valley Transit Corridor project coming up, and every transit alternative that's going to run in the middle of the street has no space given for bicycle lanes. This could be at least 130 feet long. To have a bicycle lane interrupted like that makes it useless for bicycling, because that throws you in direct path of motor vehicles going 35 miles an hour. And so it's either going to cause the people to not bicycle or be on the sidewalk. They are not going to bicycle in front of those vehicles. So that is something I've actually gone over the schematics, and there is space to put it. They only need 6 feet to put bike lanes in, and it's also on the upcoming mobility plan for protected bike lanes. Well, obviously it's not protected if you don't even have the space available. The other thing is the DOT always seems to have their priority for motor vehicles. The use of the word congested only seems to apply to streets. Anytime you have a dedicated transit way for buses or trains, they cannot be congested according to the definition that they use, nor can pedestrians or bicycles be congested. The priority is always given to the motor vehicles on the street. When you have the bike path, the orange line, you have to hit a button to cross the street at every single intersection.
Thank you. Mark, I noticed you also put in a card for general public comment, so if you'd like to take both of those now, so you don't have to come back and forth, you're more than welcome.
No, I don't mind coming back.
Okay.
And we have a minute now,
yeah,
right? Okay. The thing I'm concerned about, and maybe I don't get this, is I'm trying to figure out how the programs of Los Angeles work with long-range and system planning, because part of the criticism is that they do ad hoc or patchwork planning. So I just like it clarified how this works in long-range or system plan, because in terms of private investment in the community, typically if you don't address long-range or system plans, it discourages that investment. And cities that kind of plan patchwork have a lot of problems with their tax base because they don't provide adequate long-term solutions, and no one wants to invest in an area where you don't do that or where you have adequate capacity. So is there a way to show how this addresses that?
Someone from the department can talk to you after.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to start my remarks with the staff recognition for this month. We want to take an opportunity to recognize staff sort of who are going above and beyond at the department and doing an outstanding job trying to make this a regular occurrence that we do every month. And so this month we are recognizing two groups of people. The first is a collaboration of our Business Solutions Group, District Research and Support, and Paint and Sign Operations, which delivered something that was 40 years in the making, which is that we digitized our work orders. So as you all know, when you call in something that you want our officers or our offices to go out and implement, it was written in triplicate by hand and pushed around various departments. So those days are gone, and sort of overnight, and the program it's called eWork, has been received in a very positive way throughout the department. So we hope it makes us faster and better at addressing issues immediately and better able to track and talk about what we do. So as I call your name, if you wouldn't mind just standing, Nader Asmar, Edward Garan, Mag Hung, Scott Lynn, Kartik Patel, Moni Patel, John Sam, Kwok Tran, David Uchida, and Manuel Viramontes. So we just want to recognize and thank you for the work. And then the second group of folks I'm going to recognize are some of our outstanding folks from Parking Enforcement and Traffic Control. Nona Slater and Pyrith Reth are both here. They are both outstanding leaders. Nona is in the southern area and Pyrith is in the valley area. Nona is a training instructor for her peers, and Pyrith is an organizational leader and an on-site supervisor in the absence of his sergeant. They're both provide excellent service and really go above and beyond in serving the safety function of the traffic officers that we have out on the street. So thank you so much. Additionally, I do want to recognize one thing that happened. There's a lot of things going on in the department. We've had the closure of Crenshaw for the construction for the next couple of weeks. It's been an enormous collaboration between Metro and the Department of Transportation. Unfortunately, last week we also had a tragedy. We had a fatality on our streets, a Hamilton High student at the intersection of Venice and Robertson. And I do want to recognize that there are some folks here who wanted to sort of be seen and in sort of recognition of that tragedy on the streets. The department pulled together a meeting with the council office as well as the Expo Authority and Caltrans to talk about things we need to do immediately to address the situation at that intersection and things that we can expedite to get the intersection open and in a safer condition ahead of schedule. So obviously the department, has a call for us to adopt a Vision Zero policy to get to zero deaths and injuries for people just trying to get around town and the city. So I wanted to recognize that they're here and also just give you a sense of the department's response. And with that, those are sort of the main things that I wanted to use my time for. I know we have a very packed agenda, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are other things on your mind that you're curious about.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for putting a human face on the department and on the issues that we deal with, both in terms of the folks who you recognized here today for their work and thinking outside of the box and going above and beyond, but also in putting a human face on the need for Vision Zero and the need for safety on our streets and in our neighborhoods. So thank you for that. Colleagues, any questions for Salida? Mr. Kress?
No questions. I just wanted to echo thanks for your quick response to the tragedy at Venice and Robertson, and for quickly co-convening a meeting on the subject and all the work that was done on that issue. So, thank you.
And I should note that a DOT staffer, Zaki Mustafa, was the recipient of the first CD11 Yes Award, which we gave out in council last week for helping to cut red tape and get things done. And I'll say that the council seemed to be pretty unanimous in offering praise for Zaki and his work and the work of the department, so thank you. Okay, we'll move to item number 3.
Item number 3 is the city attorney report and ordinance authorizing LADOT to allow other city departments, officers, or boards and private agencies and persons to install, place, maintain, or remove any traffic control device or other type of sign.
Selwyn, is this one you?
Oh, want to speak to that? Okay.
It's a designation authority. Oh. Okay, as soon as we're done with this, okay, we'll do that, yeah. Go ahead, Selwyn.
Selwyn Hollins, Department of Transportation, Assistant General Manager. The purpose of amending this ordinance is to enable primarily the Bureau of Street Services to post temporary parking restriction signs, which is something they've been doing for a number of years. This simply just codifies that process and makes it in accordance with the existing ordinance. They have been actually posting temporary signs for about 15 years now. So it is no real change in how we do business, just putting it on record.
Thank you, Mr. Bonin, and thank you for allowing me just to ask a brief question. It absolutely makes sense to have this kind of interdepartmental collaboration, and so I appreciate the ordinance. The one wrinkle I wanted to throw in is that when the film and television industry does location shoots, obviously the department does a great job and always gets high praise in putting up the temporary no parking signs. One of the things that the industry has expressed a desire to do is to be able to take the signs down, remove the signs on their own when they're done with the shoot, so that the continuing inconvenience to the neighborhood doesn't unnecessarily last beyond the time when they're finished. I gather what the sort of compromise position has been. What they do is they turn them over, they turn them around, but they don't remove them because they're not entitled to. Is there has thought been given to how we might be able to just allow them, since the only reason for the no parking permit is their film shoot, when they're completed with a film shoot, could we not have a provision by which they can simply remove the signs?
Actually, we've been working on something a little bit more proactive than that with FilmLA and the production companies. We are trying to schedule a meeting, I believe, within the next 3 weeks to finalize the kind of the new guidelines. What they would really prefer is to be able to customize temporary sign hours.
That's a whole nother issue, which I'd love to see happen as well.
Yeah, and that's part of it. The reason why they need to turn the signs down or turn them around is that they may get one of our standard signs, and let's say it's for a 6-hour block. They're done after 2 hours. Right. They want to make the streets available for the public again. With the custom signs, we'll be able to better hone in on their timing. There are some things we have to ensure if we do the custom signs. For example, if they're going to come out more than once to that location that same day, what is the extent of the hours, that sort of thing. But that's what we're working to finalize. Once we have that, I think it'll be a lot more suitable for them. We really want to avoid
the whole issue.
Yeah, we really want to avoid people handling the signs because, as you may be aware, there are a number of signs that are taken, removed, put in places they shouldn't be, and we want to discourage people from kind of handling the signs.
Okay. Well, thank you for working with the industry on this. I'm happy to support this, Mr. Chairman. It's just the more we can do to try to minimize that inconvenience to neighborhoods, the better it's going to be for neighborhoods and the film industry as well.
Any questions?
No.
All right. So without objection, we'll approve this by a unanimous vote and send it to council.
You'll be approving the new ordinance dated November 3rd and receiving and filing the ordinance dated September 24th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we move to the next item, there's a couple general public comment cards. I'd like to take them now. One of the speakers, first speaker is Michael Curls, who is a member of the family of David Lindley Jr., the accident victim that Ms. Reynolds was referring to. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilman. A couple of concerns, and I'm speaking on behalf of the family of the younger Mr. David Lindley Jr., as the individual who spoke on behalf of the, and I don't know on behalf of who you were speaking. LADOT. And the LADOT appeared to have responded rather quickly to make certain changes to the intersection where the incident occurred. But there were many troubling statements attributed to the city, statements that were made to the media about the incident. And we're concerned as a family, and I'm coming to get some clarity. One of the statements in particular was that the lights at that particular intersection, lights that from one direction were green and caused the traffic to come through the intersection, while in a conflicting direction you had the pedestrian crosswalk that would tell pedestrians to cross the street. At the same time, the green lights would have traffic coming through that same intersection. And the conflicting statements were to suggest that that was as that intersection should, where it's properly supposed to be functioning, even though a day later they recalibrated that intersection and changed it so that the lights would not be green as the pedestrian crosswalk was allowing pedestrians to go through that intersection. My concern is, what is the position of the Transportation Committee as to whether that intersection was working properly prior to the death of David Lindley? Was it working as the city intended it to work, so that traffic would be coming through that intersection at the same, is my time up?
Yeah.
Oh, if traffic was coming through that intersection at the same time that pedestrians would be coming across, following the traffic signal that said pedestrians could walk. Is that as the Transportation Committee or city officials anticipated that should have happened? That's the first question. So I would ask that question.
All right. Thank you for coming here today and speaking. And I want to say to you and to the members of the family who are here how deeply sorry the city is for your tragic loss. I cannot imagine how unspeakably painful the sudden tragedy is for you, and I hope that you're able to find peace and comfort. I'd be happy to respond further, but state law prohibits us as a committee from talking in a public meeting about an item that's not on our regular agenda. It's the Brown Act, which requires public notice of any discussions we have. I can say, though, that I'm sure that Ms. Reynolds or folks with DOT would be happy to talk to you personally and one-on-one. I imagine that there's an investigation ongoing, and we haven't seen results of an investigation to comment on at this point.
And the other question, and I'll make it brief, is, and it goes to the, and I am a resident of the Crenshaw District, and we are very pleased with the efforts made to put the rail line through the Crenshaw District as well as through the Culver City corridor. But then my question becomes, is the effort to put the various mass transit through those particular areas, is it possible that safety concerns have been overlooked? Because one of the issues at that particular location where this accident occurred is that there's a significant amount of construction that is going on right at that particular location. And the concern being that because of the amount of construction that's going on in that particular area, that maybe
Yeah.
safety became
Thank you.
secondary to the...
Again, we can't comment on something that's not on the agenda.
Understood.
However, I'm a member of the Construction Authority for the Expo Rail Line, as is Mr. Koretz, and I'd be happy to find some time soon to sit down and discuss some of your concerns with you.
I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mark, how do I pronounce your last name again?
Jollis.
Jollis. You also had a public comment card.
It's kind of sad to be here following that person. I was very involved in problems with the Expo line, and there were hearings with the PUC and an administrative judge where they went through virtually every intersection and found that MTA had faked a lot of the traffic studies. There's almost 20,000 students that cross that rail line every day. The federal government wanted to pay to grade separate it. The MTA and the city turned the money down. They actually turned it down, right? The Blue Line, which has killed over 100 people, many school children, right, has had, I think, over 700 accidents, including fire trucks, public buses, etc., is still basically a death trap. There's plenty of federal money available to make that line safe. I hope that we don't just worry about accidents that happen on the west side, but we also worry about accidents that happen through poor minority areas, etc., and that we're more transparent about really how the city operates. The fact that they knowingly allow false traffic studies to be approved when they are approving these rail projects and don't speak up. And there were 3 or 4 city council people on the MTA board. The information was readily available. It is actually in the transcripts. And I would appreciate it if you, as part of whatever investigation you do, actually go through those transcripts from the PUC and see the techniques that they use to fake the traffic studies. Some studies, they actually change the information 3 times in the same hearing.
Thank you. Mark, stay put. Mark, I have a public comment card on the next item we're moving to. So
Is that the public comment?
that was general public comment.
What's the next one?
Is the monkey parking issue.
Oh.
So let me do this formally.
But I hope everybody heard that about what really goes on in terms of deaths and rail and transportation in LA.
Item number 5.
Item number 5 is a city attorney report and ordinance adding section 80.73.3 to chapter 8, Division N of the LAMC to prohibit the selling, leasing, reserving, or facilitating the reserving of any street, way, alley, highway, road, parking space, or other public space in the city without authorization.
You have 1 minute.
I think this is perfectly fine, even though I've lived in places where people appreciate someone waiting for there's an empty space and you give the person a tip, but I know we shouldn't be selling public space. We have to remember that it's part of the problem that we are in a transportation crisis because we have such a shortage and there's so much stress for people to get from point A to point B, and the city has approved so much development without assuring there's adequate or appropriate transportation capacity. It's just like people driving down residential streets and you're trying to put in speed bumps. If we had enough capacity, I don't think that would occur as much. So let's look at long-term and system planning so we don't continue the problem that we've inherited, which this is a symptom of. Thank you.
Thank you. So this item follows up on a previous action of this committee a few weeks ago. I want to thank Mr. Nagel for his quick turnaround on this. This item is an ordinance which would prohibit monkey parking in the city of Los Angeles, as has been done in Santa Monica and in San Francisco before us. It's important to note what this is not. This is not about someone hailing down a friend of theirs and saving them a spot, or holding a spot for their mother or for their daughter or something like that and letting them park when they're done. This is about someone or people pimping out our parking spots here in Los Angeles, taking something which is a public good, something that all of us own, and privatizing it for a short period of time to make private gain. It's absolutely unacceptable, and it would contribute significantly to our parking crunch here in Los Angeles. It's been a problem in other cities, and it's a predatory practice. It's a stealing economy sort of masquerading as the sharing economy. And rather than waiting for this problem to proliferate and then try to be chasing behind the problem with the solution, we've seen what has happened in other cities, and we're trying to anticipate that and prevent that. This city has spent a considerable amount of time and money in investing in smart meters and parking systems, so we have a more fair and equitable means of charging folks. It's a system that still needs a lot of reform and fixing, but this monkey parking would totally upend that. Imagine what would happen if someone gobbled up a bunch of spots near the Staples Center the night of a show, or near Venice Beach on a hot Sunday afternoon, and then tried to privatize all of those. It would be chaos. And so this is an effort to prevent that before it happens. I'm glad the city attorney was able to turn this around so quickly. I had one question on the draft ordinance, Mr. Nagel. As it's written, it says that any person violating this section will be subject to the following penalties, and it lists the first, second, and third violations. I wanted to be clear that if someone were to take up 5 or 10 spaces, that they'd be guilty of 5 or 10 offenses, that it's an offense per space.
That's correct.
On the mic.
That's correct. It would be per space or per car in a space. Charged that way by the prosecutor.
I want to make sure some smart defense lawyer doesn't try to say if someone does 10 spots, it's only one offense. Can you point out where in the language it does that?
Yeah, number 4, section 4 of the penalties, B4, each person shall be guilty of a separate offense for each and every day during any portion of which any violation of this section is committed. So if you're violating it in one spot and you've got 5 other spots you're violating it in, that's a separate offense for each one of those.
It says for each and every day, but it doesn't mention each and every spot. I'm wondering if, before we get to council, if you could just add that small change so that it indicates it's per spot.
This may not be the exact section, but I can tweak it.
Yeah, as long as that's clear when it comes to council. I just want to make sure. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Mr. Kretz?
I appreciate your efforts on this. From my own point of view, more broadly, I think the sharing economy tends to be the stealing and law-breaking economy. And from my point of view, I view the Ubers of the world and the Airbnbs of the world the same way. But I would certainly agree that this is the most egregious, selling our city streets, and I thank you for your good work on this.
Thank you. Although I take exception to part of your comments.
I'm not surprised.
Mr. Corcoran, any questions?
Likewise.
All right, so we, without objection, we will move this forward to council unanimously with the one small requested change that I had suggested. And again, thank you, Mr. Nagel. I really appreciate the quick turnaround on this. All right, next item is item number 6.
Item number 6 is a Bonin-Weezer-O'Farrell motion relative to the Department of City Planning and LADOT undertaking specific tasks in anticipation of the state's adoption of the amended CEQA guidelines implementing SB 743.
Okay, so this is one of the more technical and wonky items we could have before us, and it is probably one of the most significant and potentially impactful items we could have before us in terms of development and traffic mitigation. The state is changing the way we evaluate traffic impacts from projects, from a system level of service, which effectively measures how quickly, how many cars can move through an intersection, to an entirely different system, which has a number of stated benefits, putting a focus on greenhouse gas emissions, and also making it easier to do pedestrian safety projects, active transportation projects, and build projects that won't be penalized for trying to be forward-thinking or neighborhood-friendly. At the same time, there's a lot of peril in that, and it looks like there's some areas of concern in how the state has begun drafting the rules. My understanding is that this comment letter went through Plum last week. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So if you could sort of, maybe Salita, if you could start and sort of explain a little bit of context about what the state is trying to do,
Sure.
and then if Tom and, is it David? David could sort of explain what some of the issues are that we're putting in our comment letter where we're concerned about what the state's doing.
Sure. So to begin with, in 1965, the first version of the Highway Capacity Manual came out. There's been 3 revisions of it since, and if you haven't read it, don't, unless you're having trouble sleeping. But I'll give you the punchline, which is that it gave us really the only blunt force tool that land use planners, transportation planners have had to describe the condition of our streets and the impacts of development, which was level of service. And that became the sort of standard bearer for environmental review. And environmental review is really about disclosing impacts to communities so they can understand how development is going to affect them. The problem is that an unintended consequence of level of service, in particular in cities, is that it made it much harder to build development in smarter places where there already is a concentration of services and people, and it made it much easier to build and cheaper to build development out in sort of the exurban parts of our city. And so in recognition of that unintended consequence, the Office of Planning and Research is trying to right the ship in response to years and years of discussion with cities, with land use attorneys, with developers, with traffic engineers, with communities, to allow us to change the way that we talk about development and talk about transportation in an environmental review context. So really that is the substance of what the state is trying to do. The substance of our comment letter really centers around 3 things. One is we are asking, along with a lot of other cities, for additional time. The state wanted us to be ready to sort of rewrite the rules in 4 months, and we recognize that there is a lot of potential peril involved with that. I think the conversation at the last time this came up sort of indicated just the tip of the iceberg in terms of discussion with developers and the development community, the public community. So we are asking for more time. We are also cautioning the state to still empower cities to set our own thresholds for impacts. So there was some language in the initial information that sort of could be misconstrued, that the state is going to tell cities what constitutes an impact. That has traditionally been up to cities and counties and jurisdictions to say what is an impact in their community. That power has rested and really been under local control. So we asked to make sure that that's clarified, that we as the city are going to have a conversation about that, and we need to be the ones to set those thresholds of what is an impact. And then the last sort of comment in there was the state, I think, is trying to move in a good direction and bring safety into the way that we talk about projects and do environmental review. And we just wanted to sound a note of caution there that we may not have the tools to really do that effectively. So just to sort of, and that safety is something critical, but CEQA may not be the right forum for us to have a safety conversation, just because it's really designed to disclose environmental impacts. So that's the substance. I think that's the macro view of what the state is trying to do, and the sort of bottom line of what our comment letter back is trying to communicate.
So if you could just answer one question before I turn it over to the other speakers. The new metric is VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Explain exactly what that will measure.
So there's a couple of different ways to go about that. Vehicle miles traveled would measure the length of the trips that a development might generate. And so when you analyze that and say the longer the trip is, the more impact you have, then the mitigation to fix that is about reducing vehicle trips. It's about things that can be done, education, encouragement, transportation demand management, to incentivize other types of choices. For transportation projects, it gets a little bit trickier, and I won't sort of bore you with the technical details, but when I add a bike lane, that may not have any material impact to the vehicle miles traveled. So we want to make sure that we set the rule book so that we can disclose the things and talk about the things that communities want to know about, and that we do that. We understand that there's really a pretty complicated environment for the project types that we're dealing with in a city like LA.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
Before we get too deep into the weeds, what's the general purpose of this legislation? What are they actually getting at and trying to accomplish?
So what level of service did is, if I'm a developer and I'm building, I want to build an apartment building downtown, I'm going to use level of service to analyze the impacts of my development. And I'm going to use a pretty blunt tool to determine how many trips I'm generating, even though I'm downtown next to a transit station. And what that analysis is going to tell me to do is to widen that intersection and provide additional lanes of traffic so that I improve the level of service at intersections that are adjacent to my development. And then what happens is that developer brings that, or the city as a lead agency brings that environmental review through the process, and the local agency just has to say, well, we're just going to have to adopt statements of overriding consideration because we can't widen that street, there's buildings there, and really there's nothing we can do about it. So the development community then, it's cheaper and easier for them sometimes to go and develop out in a place where there isn't a lot of traffic, and there is a lot of capacity that can still be absorbed by the roadway system, where one additional trip doesn't trigger an impact. And there's a recognition that incentivizing that kind of development is not necessarily aligned with our policy goals. It doesn't put our policymakers in the position of being able to get different outcomes from those mitigation conversations. And it doesn't leave us with the kind of transportation enhancements that we want to see from those developments. So the state is trying to change those rules to incentivize the right kind of the development that's more in alignment with our own policy goals about where we want to see growth.
I'll draw a parallel with something, and it's both a good and a bad parallel, because it offers a bit of a cautionary tale. The parallel draws with SB 1818, which was a Senate bill a few years ago, which was designed to increase and promote affordable housing. And in exchange, it gave a density bonus. And it has not been well implemented. There's been a lot of problems with it. Mr. Krikorian and I have been dealing with some. Assemblyman Nazarian has been extremely helpful on that. Similarly, this has been written and proposed as a strong environmental protection measure, that the goal of this is to put a premium on calculating greenhouse gas emissions and promoting developments, particularly infill, that discourage projects that create a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and encourage developments that have a small carbon footprint. Where it's going to get hairy, I think, is, the state's going to do what the state's going to do. We're providing comments. What's going to get hairy is once the state gives us the guidelines and we start writing our rules here at the local level, we've got to do a hell of a lot better job writing the rules for this than we did with SB 1818, because we tended to take the most lax approach on SB 1818, which has caused tremendous problems, and we need to be very careful, both in the comments that I think have been judiciously made, but also in how we deal with the next stage here.
Mr. Chair, if I could follow up on that, I would have to say it wasn't that SB 1818 was implemented in error. SB 1818 was kind of a scam to allow greater development while looking like it was intended for affordable housing, where you could actually remove many more units than the affordable housing you replace and get a bonus. And And frankly, it was a policy decision by previous councils to implement it that way is for more development. So I think it's not just a question of whether we make a mistake, but making sure we understand the policy and that we drive a good policy at this point.
Precisely. That's why I'm conducting these little mini APTA conferences at this committee. Do you have any questions at this point before we go to Tom and David? Okay, gentlemen.
So,
What are our comment letters going to say?
our comment letter, you've heard what our three main concerns. By the way, I'm Tom Carranza with LADOT. The one you didn't hear was OPR does recommend that the changes apply to transit priority areas first, but we have a concern with how they define these transit priority areas. They are currently solely defined by proximity, where a project is located in proximity to available transit. We feel that you also need to consider actual transit ridership, because some of the areas that fall within their transit priority area map are in areas that have very little transit usage. So that is another one of our comments that we'll be including in the letter. But the other three you've heard. The timeline is a big issue. The deadline to OPR was extended. The original deadline was early October. The deadline is now November 21st, and because it's a huge undertaking, and they heard right away that people need more time to digest this. But we've taken that extra time to consult with other cities and hear what their issues are. And the big item is the timeline. Cities need more time to meet with stakeholders, to rewrite their guidelines that have been in place for 20 plus years. David?
All the comments, the main comments that as Tomas and Salida mentioned, those were the main points in our comment letter. I guess I would just add that our dialogue with the OPR has been ongoing. We're actually in good standing. I don't know, perhaps in contrast to SB 1818, I don't really have enough institutional memory as to see how that process went out, but I can say that we really did see this coming. We've been in conversation with OPR this whole time. With the staff there, they've made themselves very accessible to us, and we've been able to articulate this in person, and everything that's in our comment letter. We've received feedback that this is going to be given due consideration. It's many of the same comments that a lot of the other cities have talked about. We've had regular conference calls with City of San Francisco. I've talked to planners in San Jose and similarly. So we've really been part of a greater dialogue with how redefining how we consider transportation really from an environmental perspective. And all the comments have been right. I mean, the problems with level of service is really the scope is too narrow to really treat it as true to the spirit of CEQA that's intended. Especially with a focus on greenhouse gas reduction. VMT per capita is the metric that we actually recommended in the previous comment to OPR, so we're on good standing as far as the direction that everything is going in. We think that this would work best within the city of LA with the greatest geographic variation that we have, development projects in the valley versus downtown versus West LA. They're all going to be treated much more uniquely with a unique lens rather than level of service is kind of just, it's a very myopic view that just looks at, what's happening at that 10 or 12 closest intersections, but VMT per capita will provide us really the greatest framework for understanding what is the transportation behavior patterns of development projects and really give us a true indictment of what is our land use policies and how that feeds back on our transportation infrastructure. I also just like to mention that it does put us in line much more, put us in greater alignment with the mayor's own budget priority objectives of looking at the performance of our community plans on a VMT per capita basis over time. It's also in greater alignment with LADOT's strategic plan in a lot of ways as far as focusing on livability, providing the types of infrastructure that will promote attraction to other transportation modes, such as bicycling and taking transit. It definitely is much kinder to the policies that we want to pursue as a city, and will remove a lot of the red tape that's been kind of obstructing this. Has been made clear by things like the Hollywood Community Plan or even smaller development projects that see themselves, these are infill projects for all intents and purposes. There's no, sort of greater environmental impact, but they're still hamstrung by the CEQA process, and this really changes the dynamics in a significant way in that effort.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the comment letter that you guys have prepared. I think you identified some deficiencies and some problems with the standards that OPR was developing. One that freaked me out was the one on confining analysis to political boundary. I think both of my colleagues and I have neighboring jurisdictions. If they're anything like my neighboring jurisdictions, they're very good at putting developments on the boundary of the cities so that they get a lot of sales tax revenue and we get a lot of traffic impact. And I'm glad that you have urged that not be the case. I mean, we really have to look at the impact on a neighborhood and pay as little attention to the dividing line between the cities as the actual traffic itself does. The other thing I was very happy to see is your comments on the OPR's definition of finding of no significant impact. I know that they want to set a standard so that you presume there's no significant impact near high transit places or places with high transit lines, but there's places, an example in my district, in Pacific Palisades, where the Big Blue Bus runs, where there may be a bus line that goes down there, but a lot of that street area has no sidewalk. It's very difficult to navigate, so it has an entirely different impact. So I think the OPR standards have not been sufficiently flexible. Once we make our comment letter, what happens and what ability do we as policymakers have to reach out to policymakers at the state level to make sure that our concerns are actually heeded?
My sense is that OPR is going to take comment letters from across the state and that they will, I don't know if y'all have any more insight, but my impression is that they will issue another sort of rulemaking, I guess. And I'm not sure if that will be the final one or not. But I know that the governor's office has been involved. I know that, Office of Planning and Research has been very open. And I can certainly say that they've been, their sense is that they're making this change to respond to requests that really have come from cities to give cities more flexibility and to make sure that the unintended consequence of the rules that they make isn't in direct opposition to the policies that cities are trying to set. So I think that they're very, they want the feedback and they want to create something that will work for cities.
And one thing to keep in mind is that OPR, the recommendation is considered a preliminary draft. So according to their staff that we've talked to, their recommendation is likely to evolve, perhaps substantially in response to the comments that they've heard.
They've articulated that this was really a first cut at just soliciting what kind of feedback. So a lot of the things I think that they were presenting were just kind of, they were just throwing out ideas and just seeing sort of what the responses to that were. They seemed to be very amenable to, changing the language. They have indicated that they may go through another draft to final process to get even a greater amount of feedback before it gets transferred to the State Resource Agency, and then they in turn actually have their own public input process. It's a little bit more formalized than OPR, but there is still opportunity before us to make sure that we have the right rulemaking process in place for the city.
I hesitate to ask this question, but do they have anything that addresses the following scenario? Someone builds a big, huge development, a couple hundred housing units, right next to a light rail stop. But the folks who live in that building wind up not using the transit system, and they all take their cars to and from work and going about their business every day. Right. Is there anything in there that has any indications or predictors of whether or not a development actually is likely to use the transit, or if it's just going to be transit adjacent and therefore create all the traffic problems we're having anyway?
So you've just touched on a major deficiency of CEQA that's been there up to now. And there are examples of communities that have put in place monitoring plans so that one of the most obvious examples is actually the Stanford campus in Palo Alto. They have to monitor their trip-making sort of profile on an annual basis, and if they are out of line with certain goals set for them by the city, that they have to put in place measures to achieve those goals. So that's something that has always been under the purview of cities and will remain under the purview of cities, from my understanding. So we could do that right now if we wanted to.
Mr. Backstrom and Ms. Roundtree, that's something we're going to want to be working on.
Also, I just want to mention that there's actually a lot of opportunity there, because we've just been awarded a $500,000 grant from the Strategic Growth Council, and major scope of us for awarding that was to actually do just that, confirm what is the transit utilization of residential projects, and also show, have that as an income component to it. We know from national household travel surveys that lower income households use transit 40% more than higher income households at a minimum. That's just what the data shows. However, the ITE Trip Generation Handbook makes no allowances or doesn't even address the variation of income on trip generation. So we want to create, this grant is actually to produce our own data. We're actually also collaborating with groups in the Bay Area that are doing this as well, and studying the link really between income and transportation utilization, because that was one of the things that we considered. Similarly, it's not, there's been studies that have shown that just because we're providing housing near transit stations, people are going to use transit, and there's studies that have shown that some places transit utilization has remained flat and may have even declined in areas where they've displaced a lot of people that were transit riders. And so we know that this is something that's going to be important.
Let's have an offline conversation about that and try to brainstorm some local fixes to that. Okay. Colleagues, questions? Okay.
Covered it very well.
Thank you very much. Mark, you had a public comment card on this one?
Sorry, this is my last one. Typically, to know whether transit attracts trips from development is supposed to be done before the transit's built. It's actually modeled, and Mike, the transit that they're developing here is not designed to attract those trips. It's not modeled like that. Mike, did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just letting you know, you could develop all you want. It's not going to attract the trips because it's not designed properly. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so without objection, the direction of the committee will be to approve the comments along with Plum on behalf of the city in response to the OPR's discussion draft. But the second half of this item 2, which is prepare and present to the Transportation Committee a report on a number of different items, what the workload will be, and some other stuff that we won't know until we know about the final draft. Keep the second part here so we can have that report back in due time.
And that report is in the works.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Item number 7.
Item number 7 is a DOT report relative to expanding the car share pilot program for 2 years to test the implementation of a multi-provider permit system in the city of Los Angeles.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dee Allen with Department of Transportation.
Tamara Martin, also with Department of Transportation.
We're back before you today. Basically, we'd like to get your approval to move forward with Phase 2 of the car share program. We are calling it Phase 2 because there are 3 phases. Phase 1 was the historical car share program that you may be familiar with that we brought before you, where we had 40 cars, and we were going forward with that since 2009. Phase 2 is where we are today, where we're looking at a multi-provider car share permit program that you asked us to investigate. We're here today to ask you to give us permission to go forward with that pilot program. And then phase 3 will be, we will come back in April with recommendations and guidelines to do a one-way car share program that you had asked us to do. So with that, I'd just like to give you a little summary of what this phase 2 looks like, and then leave it open for technical comments or questions. We're looking at putting together a permit program, 24 months, looking at about 100 spaces by the end of the fiscal year, total of about 250 spaces for the 2-year period. It would be a multi-provider. The car share organizations would be qualified and they would submit a permit application to us. We would process that permit application and go forward with the program. We are currently doing this with existing resources. We have also included in here a recommendation for a fee structure for this phase 2 program. Is based on full cost recovery for the program. And we want to thank, we had a work group that worked with us to develop the guidelines for us, and it was the mayor's office, the council office, and our office. I think we even had the CEO and CLA as a part of it. And so in the report, you'll see probably about 16 pages of guidelines. So we went through everything in terms of how it worked and how the implementation would work, and the guidelines are attached to the report. So with that, I'll leave it open for specific questions that you may have, and we're happy to answer it, and would hope that you would support us moving forward with this pilot program.
How many car share companies are interested in participating in the program?
We don't exactly know what we're going to receive. We know we have met with probably about 3 companies so far, but I'm not really sure, what the market will say. We'll see when we go forward with it.
I just noticed we have a number of speaker cards. I had a couple more questions, but
Yeah,
let's
no problem.
see if new questions come up from the speakers. Michael Mikos from Car2Go, Doug Arsenault from VICA, Ruben Gonzalez from the LA Chamber, and item number 7 is the name representing Zipcar. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michael Mikas, Director of Strategic Development at Car2Go. I definitely want to thank Council, the Mayor and his staff, Selena Reynolds, and the DOT for their hard work launching car share in LA. We find it an important first step in creating a better transportation network and more options to have people removed out of cars, ultimately. We want to give additional support to Phase 3, as Dee outlined, to include point-to-point. We feel it enhances the car share program further, allowing people to get from point A to point B easier, to go to different parts of the city, as well as connect with the first mile, last mile with public transportation. So we want to throw our support to that Phase 3 as well, and are eager to work with them on developing that piece.
Thank you. Doug?
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Arsenault of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We strongly support the pilot project. We think it's going well and are interested in its rollout. We urge the city to expand it to incorporate point-to-point car sharing providers such as Car2Go. Point-to-point providers offer an innovative approach that will be attractive to Angelinos in closing that critical first mile, last mile gap. This model provides the option for expedient one-way trips by allowing users to conveniently pick up and drop off the vehicle anywhere they need it. As such, users can confidently leave their cars at home or forgo car ownership entirely, helping relieve unnecessary VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and incentivize multimodal commuting. Further, the model provides the opportunity for vehicles to be better distributed throughout the city based on demand. This accessibility will expand the benefits of car sharing to a greater range of communities, including where robust, interconnected transit systems do not yet exist, such as in the Valley. These providers have proven successful in cities across the region, including locally in the South Bay. As the city looks to implement a more robust car sharing program, a range of options is necessary to make the program attractive to residents. One size certainly doesn't fit all. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Ruben. With musical accompaniment.
I get my own soundtrack. Thank you. It's like going up to the batter's box. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez. I'm here on behalf of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. As you know, we've been very strong proponents of creating a seamless transit system in Los Angeles. If we can make that happen, it'll be a great boon to our economy, more jobs. We can grow this economy. But we do still have gaps. And one of the ways to fill those gaps, especially the first mile, last mile issue, as Doug mentioned, are these car sharing programs. So we fully support the pilot program. But as the prior speakers have said, we firmly believe that a point-to-point program needs to be considered in this pilot. And just as a matter of our approach to public policy, this is the time to try every flavor of car sharing program to see what works best in Los Angeles. Maybe after the pilot we find that one model works better than others. Maybe we find that we can use many different models in this city for our unique needs, and they are unique needs. Our geography, our riders are different than other places. So please support the program, but add the point-to-point model as well. Thank you.
And we have a representative from Zipcar.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Shields. I'm the general manager for Zipcar here in Los Angeles. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this item. I also want to thank LADOT and staff for their work on this report thus far. As you may know, we currently operate 350 cars in the city of Los Angeles, including 40 of the on-street cars. We currently still have the pilot and have had that pilot agreement since 2009. While this report makes substantial progress towards reaching a workable model, we believe that the pricing model needs further consideration in order for it to be both sustainable and scalable for operators. So I provided a handout prior to the start of today that has some car sharing rates from other cities that have very robust and growing on-street programs. As you can see, cities are charging on an average of about $250 to $300 per space, and this will that's in high demand areas, and that's significantly more than what we pay through private relationships. However, we would be willing to pay that premium in order to expand our footprint. So we understand the city striving to make this a cost-neutral program and wants to recover the cost, but in order for this to be a program that meets all Angelinos and we can exceed it, expectations and grow this program, we do need to take cost into consideration. So as a whole, we're supportive, but we would appreciate the consideration of looking at the current price fees, and thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I've got more questions. Colleagues, do either of you have questions? Okay. So first, could you start by addressing the point Mr. Gonzalez made about point-to-point and when we'll be getting to point-to-point and why?
We will be moving forward with recommendations on the point-to-point in April of 2015. We need a little bit more time to figure out how we would implement that model. We need to figure out how that model would fit into our current parking restrictions, because what it is that you start out with a trip and then you take the vehicle to your destination and you leave the vehicle there. And so that's a different model, and so we have to figure out, number one, what the fees are going to be. How does it fit with existing parking regulations such as street sweeping, whether they want to park in disabled parking spaces. So we need to sort of figure out how it would actually work. It's not that we are not supportive of it, but we need to make sure that it works. And so we will be coming back to you in April with having figured some of those things out with a recommendation and guidelines like you see here for the traditional.
And what about the concerns that Zipcar raised about the pricing structure?
Pardon me, I didn't...
The concerns that Zipcar just raised about the pricing structure.
The pricing structure is based on the meter hours in part. In part, it is based on full recovery of metered hours for the time that a vehicle would be in a metered space. The permit structure is based on what we anticipate staff time to be, and space conversion fees, and essentially structuring the permit system. Now, there have been concerns over the cost of metered spaces, but that would be for full-time use of the metered space.
What if those metered spaces are in an express park area where the metered rate is variable?
If it is, we would have to go out and check whether it is in an area where we could put a space. If we do have spaces that are not in a peak hour lane or something like that, where it is subject to express park rates, yes, that would view full cost recovery for whatever hours the vehicle would be using the space, and that would be full-time under the dedicated space model.
Full cost recovery or full cost recovery plus?
No, that would be for the metered space, whatever the revenue generation would be anticipated for full use of that at the time frame, sir.
Because you have two sort of separate costs. One, you have the upfront cost, the permit fee cost, preparing the site and all of that. And then you have the meter revenue recapture. And so we have data on all of the meters in the city of Los Angeles, and so as staff, we recommended if it was occupying the space for this amount of time, this is what it would cost. If you chose to do something less, it's really a policy issue, and I can't tell you today whether it should be 25% of that cost or whatever. We'd have to look at that and see what that cost would be.
And so the pricing per space would be different from someplace in downtown, which may have a higher parking rate than someplace that doesn't have as higher.
The meter recovery would be different.
And
yes.
a higher parking turnover. I mean,
Right.
some of those
Yes.
spaces are just, in Hollywood, in Little Tokyo, in downtown, versus, some other neighborhoods that don't have the same kind of rates or the same kind of turnover in the space. The space may be empty for large parts of the day. That's where the variability in the rate comes in. I think what Dee is underlining is that it is a policy call whether or not we think that we want to get full cost recovery from those spaces, or if we think there is some, greater good served by having car sharing available, and we want to, come off of that.
But you just made me think of something else. When Mr. Buscaino came into office, he immediately had some parking meters removed in San Pedro because they weren't filling up. It wasn't a question of turnover. It was felt by the business community. It was just sort of punitive. In areas without parking meters, will car share slots or pods be able to be put in places that don't have a parking meter?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's just a flat rate for that price?
The meter, I guess, I don't know, Dee, if there is a parking rate, but basically the fee that they would pay would be mainly the permit fee.
Mainly the first upfront cost, the first time cost, they would pay for that.
So what's the criteria for locating a car share space?
So we're letting the market drive that. They based on their business model and, the value of having that space, and also the extent of public acceptance of having that space be a car sharing space, we're really relying on them to tell us where they would like to be, in terms of where it's important, where they think their customer base is, where they think they can get the most out of a particular location. For a company like Zipcar and the more traditional model, they can also more easily be in off-street locations and parking lots, but there are large parts of the city where there aren't parking lots available. So obviously it's more critical for them to have, an opportunity to be in those public spaces where they don't have an off-street alternative. And so we're hoping that sort of that's the way it plays out. But LADOT, under this proposal, would be the sort of, would have the sort of right to determine if their outreach was adequate and if, they were in an appropriate space. So I can see, for example, if we had a blue zone that they wanted to come and take, we would probably either require that blue zone to be relocated or we would deny that request because or if they wanted to take over a yellow zone or a white zone or something like that, that they need to be in spaces that are already for street parking.
We are also encouraging them, not a requirement, but encouraging them to look at areas in South Los Angeles, south of USC, because we feel like there may be a need there, it just hasn't been sort of tested, and so we've encouraged them to really sort of look at perhaps spots that way. So we'll be looking at that
Great.
as well.
And I'm strongly encouraging them, any car share companies listening, CD11, will help you find locations. Very eager for that. Just a final question. Who determines, or what is the standard to determine what a qualified car share operator is?
That one, we've proposed a level of 100 cars for the car share company, as well as the other items are also listed, I believe, in the report and the guidelines.
They have to be financially stable. They have to have the right amount of insurance. They have to be at least 100 vehicles. And we are making sure that we're not including taxis and our other kind of autos for hire as a part of a car share organization.
Right.
So that's in the...
And as you do that, you got to keep an eye, I'll anticipate what I think Mr. Koretz is saying, you've got to keep an eye on the emerging economy, to keep an eye on new trends, new technologies, to make sure that we're not opening the door to something we might not want to open the door to. We may want to, but we need to be understanding when those points are happening.
That's why we try to narrowly define it here, and then we'll see what comes through as we go forward.
Yeah, I have one other concern. What about areas where the parking demand is really intense, like Westwood, where you would fight for every on-street parking space? Is there a way to avoid placing that on-street and rather use one of the many not so apparent to customers but existent Westwood spaces instead?
So I think that really gets at the matter of there's a sort of built-in incentive. These companies want to go where they're wanted. They don't want to have their cars be the bane of a community or a neighborhood, because that's not a good business practice for them to attract additional customers. So it's in their interest to have the space be something that the neighborhood or the block wants. They've already, Zipcar in particular, has already demonstrated that they do excellent public outreach. They will go around the corner. They will offer the opportunity, but go around the corner because they want to be in a place that people will, they're viewed as a positive addition to the community. And then that's where LADOT and your offices come into play in sort of considering these kind of locations and flagging them if they're in really, sort of areas of high parking demand, which is one of the reasons why we weren't, why it's a pilot, we continue to think about it as a pilot, because we're just not sure yet how much staff resources will be required to manage the conversation and manage the selection and sort of encouraging and incentivizing them to go in the right places.
And I haven't followed how it wound up working in Westwood, but Westwood seems like the perfect place because there almost certainly would be demand, and there's plenty of not necessarily so obvious but private parking that could be rented, rather than putting it in an on-street location. So if we do this right, it'll be gratefully appreciated by the people that want to use it. If we do it wrong and take some spaces in Westwood Village, people may want to kill us at the same time.
Well, and I would imagine that Westwood Village is another great example of a place where there would be a premium on that on-street space. So there's also a built-in financial incentive to find, the least expensive place for them to be, and that the metered space might not meet that criteria.
So maybe there are ways to do wayfinding, both in apps and on the street, to help people find them without it necessarily having to take a premium on-street space.
And we understand that Metro has approved a car share policy, where they're looking at their park and ride lots and hiring a consultant to do that. So we want to reach out to them and talk and see where we can leverage resources in terms of the spaces and making it available that way too, because there's been a concern about having some of those spaces near our transit stations for that first mile, last mile.
Absolutely.
It's funny, I just asked Mr. Lopez that exact question about Metro
I heard you.
30 seconds before you answered.
I heard you.
So I'm pleased to hear it, because certainly in my area, some of the rail stations are obvious candidates for this, and it would really facilitate ridership to be able to know that once you arrive at your destination, say in North Hollywood, you can pick up the car and go anywhere in the valley. It would be a big step forward.
So it sounds like, without objection, we'll approve this, send it to council. I would like a report back maybe in February on what's going on with the development of Phase 3 and the point-to-point. I think some of the comment cards are right on. I mean, the point-to-point is very important, and I want to make sure that even as we're rolling this out, that we're moving forward on that as well.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that takes up, there's nothing left on the balance of the regular agenda, so we will adjourn the regular meeting, and Mr. White will now give me permission to open the special. Thank you so much. So on the special agenda, there are two items. Anybody have any problems moving item number 1? Item number 2 on consent?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so item number 2 will go on consent, and we have item number 1.
Item number 1 is a communication from the City Streets and Transportation Projects Oversight Committee relative to the prioritization of projects for the Active Transportation Project Cycle 1 funding, new and existing position authorities for LADOT and Bureau of Engineering.
All right, and we have a couple of public comment cards to start. Hillary Norton from FAST, Derek Bruins from the LA County Bike Coalition, and Mark, you've got one last card. And as everybody's coming up, just to get a little context here, I want to thank DOT for the great work they've done in securing so many grants. We have had a great track record in doing that and getting some money that really has the potential of giving us a really robust active transportation system. But we've discovered, and this has been an issue we've discussed here before, that we're not really well equipped to deliver all those grant projects that we've so successfully pursued. And the item before us today is some recommendations and some steps we can take to build in the resource capacity we need to get stuff done. So, Mark, why don't you go first?
Again, I'm just going to put emphasis on that you guys look at it long range and system planning, because that's what provides adequate capacity to attract new investment in the city. And I have this emails from the Federal Transit Administration talking about the deficiencies of the Expo, and that they do about 200 projects a year around the country, and they said that basically they could not, the way it was designed, that based on modeling, it didn't show a benefit, and benefit is what attracts the ridership, improved travel time, cost or convenience, and they asked MTA to redo their model so that they would show the benefit. MTA has consistently said the model didn't work, and the FTA actually paid to have consultants come out and check to see if the model was working properly, and it was, from universities all around the country.
Thank you. Hillary?
Good afternoon. In the 22 and a half years since I first came to City Hall, I am here to say item number 1 is great and we fully support it at FAST, but it's just a good start. That this is one of the busiest years that DOT and planning are going to have with the mobility element, the LADOT strategic plan, SB 743, cap and trade. And from what DOT was to what it is now, it has lost so much staff. And I just hope that we double and triple down on the request that's being made here today, because there is so much to do, and the concurrence of vision and just the need for additional grant making, because so many more of these funds are not just automatically coming to the city but have to be applied for. I want to just make sure that we are here today and every day, that there's an opportunity to give more staff to LADOT and planning for that matter, to make sure we adequately implement everything that we have the vision to do and has been put into these plans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric.
Good afternoon. Just want to speak very quickly in favor of this as well. LACBC and Safe Route School National Partnership have been working with the city, with Metro, with the state to create the source of funding to begin with, and then to work with the city to be so successful in applying for it. And we really want to thank the LADOT staff for doing so well and bringing home $22 million in new Safe Route School money in addition to other projects. It's absolutely critical that we figure out how to unclog this pipeline so that way we can actually deliver on the promise to LA City residents and actually build these projects that keep us safe and deliver on Vision Zero. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all the public comment cards. Mr. Hirano, why don't you come up and join us at the table? Mr. Hirano, whose new middle name and mantra is hands off, measure R, right?
We'll see.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Who wants to go first? Why don't you?
You want me to go first? Yes, I'll Go first. Okay. You know what he wants. Good afternoon. David Hirano from the Office of the CAO. Before you have a report from the Street and Transportation Projects Oversight Committee, which is comprised of representatives of our office, the Mayor's office, and the Chief Legislative Analyst. The STPOC met on November 6th of this year to hear a request from the Department of Transportation for additional staff for transportation grant activities for the Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works Bureau of Engineering. The STPOC unanimously approved the request and has forwarded it to you for consideration, and we would ask for your approval as well. Put this request in context. There's been a lot of talk about active transportation projects and the recent outstanding award that the city received. DOT gets a lot of the credit for achieving that award. It's about $65 million worth of projects. But the real issue is that we have a tremendous amount of existing grant projects that we're working on, and this award just adds to the backlog and to the pot of projects that we're working on. The existing staff at DOT and engineering are fully occupied with their existing projects, and in order to allow them to work on ATP projects and not drop the ball on others, we recommend that you approve their request for additional resources. Now, in reviewing their request for additional resources, we ask them to also look internally to their existing resources and to do things such as reprioritize, realign their work internally, look at ways to bring an enhanced skill set to the existing employees. So there's some requests for training in here as well. And then also look at whether consultants were available to help with some of the workload. They've done each of that. In addition, the Bureau of Street Services was asked to do this as well. The Bureau of Street Services believes that with their existing staffing and the staffing they've been recently allowed to hire by the Managed Hiring Committee, that they will be able to manage the incremental impact for about a year. After that, there will start to be negative impacts to their work program. So we intend to come back through the budget process with an analysis of the Bureau of Street Services and potentially the Bureau of Contract Administration staffing as well, and potentially supplement this request with additional staffing for those two departments. And department staff from engineering, street services, DOT are all here to help answer questions if you have any.
Thank you.
So just to summarize, the recommendations are for council to approve these grant reimbursable recommendations totaling approximately $2.5 million to be front funded from the Transportation Grant Fund, and it is for providing 6 months worth of funding for a total of 14 positions, 9 new resolution authority positions, and 5 vacant resolution authorities, and also to provide funding for consultant services, training, and other administrative expenses.
So the dynamic here is a bit of a familiar one for DOT. I mean, over the past few years, the workload and the mandates to the department have increased dramatically, and the resources haven't. In some cases, they've been reduced. We see that when we talk about resurfacing and restriping all the time. Hopefully that's something that the group is also working on. Having increased demands on your time and your workload without additional resources is a bad situation to be in. My staff is probably familiar with it, and I'm glad that we're taking some steps to fix it. I'm wondering if Salita, could you also talk about how the department is reorganizing to focus on project delivery as well?
Sure. So reorganizing is a term that freaks people out. So I will say,
Sorry.
we are going through sort of systematically, especially during the beginning of a budget season, and taking a look at everything that we've said is a priority in our strategic plan, the mobility plan for the city, and what we're currently working on, and trying to reorient staff's current workload towards those, continuing to meet our core functions, but maybe rethinking some of the things that we've maybe traditionally done kind of almost on automatic. There are a lot of examples of projects in the department, and, in my short time here, I'm sure there are a lot more. A lot of roadway widening projects, for example, that the department went after grant funding for, and then discovered that, there was really no public appetite, no community appetite for those projects, and needing to make some tough choices about taking those off our plate so that we can focus on the things where we do have both funding and community support, and also trying to change the way that we do outreach and the way that we apply for grant funding in the future so that we avoid that conundrum. So it's not so much a reorganization as it is a very thorough look at our current carry forward and backlog of projects to make sure that we're not spending time on things or continuing to spin our wheels on projects that are basically non-starters.
So if we approve this, what does this mean to a resident of one of the neighborhoods of Los Angeles? What are they not seeing that this will allow them to see?
Well, there is a $250 million backlog of projects, and those are not just being delivered by DOT, those are being delivered by Bureau of Engineering, Bureau of Street Services. So it's really a much faster delivery of projects that the community has been asking about for years and has been told are coming. So just in my own neighborhood, there is a Safe Routes to School project at Mitchell-Torrena Elementary School to tighten up the corners, do some curb extensions, I guess you guys call them bump outs, do some curb extensions to create more sidewalk space for school children trying to get across the street, to reorganize the way that the bus pickup and drop off happens. And, that one is just circling the drain because we don't have enough engineers to get to either managing a consultant or designing it themselves. So there are a lot of projects like that. There are at least 2 or 3 other school projects that folks have brought to my attention that have been sitting around for a while. So but they really do run the gamut. But most of them are, the ones that really get me are the Safe Routes to School projects where we've got people that have been waiting for things for a really long time.
Jessica Meany is nodding feverishly, yes.
I'll bet she is.
She's been waiting for a very
I'll bet
long
Ms.
time.
Meany is agreeing wholeheartedly.
So part of what we're getting here is something we haven't had before. We're now going to have a 5-year sort of forecast of resources and deliverables.
We're getting there. Yes. We're making a move in that direction. We will get there.
Good. Well, kudos to Carlos Rios. I know he's been a part of making that happen. So $2.5 million, how much of that is reimbursable?
Mostly all of it is my understanding.
There's a small component that may not be reimbursable, the training component.
No,
And then,
I'm sorry, the survey.
right, and the amount that, there's a little bit of survey work that departments are going to have to begin before they get formal approval in order to make the projects come in on time. So my guess is we're going to get at least $2 million of that back in some form of reimbursement.
Well, whenever the CAO's office comes and recommends increase in number of positions and increase in fundings, who am I to say no?
I know.
But that being said, we have had the experience in the past in this department of having grant-funded expenditures that actually took a toll on the general fund because general fund administrative and indirect costs were not reimbursed to the general fund properly as they should have been. So I guess the first thing I would want to do is make sure that there is no general fund impact here. And if there is, then, that's something we're going to have to consider in the larger context of other general fund demands in the budget process. But the other thing I just wanted to make sure of is the 9 positions are all resolution authorities. They will not exceed in duration the duration of the grant funding, correct?
Correct. We're
Yes.
partly because of their grant funded, but partly because we're starting in the middle of the year, we're recommending resolution authorities, but we intend to continue to look at the entire scope of the capital program. So we intend to look at the entire scope of not just ATP, but safe routes and highway safety improvement, the grade streets, the safety-focused capital improvement expenditure program that we're all working on. They're working on different components and trying to provide the right amount of staff to allow them to get those projects done. So it's not just this. As we move through the budget process, we'll take another look at this, and there may be some adjustments up or down depending on what the workload is. And what the chairman referred to is we're also trying to put together a 5-year outlook and see where we stand with that. So we'll make some further adjustments to this, and hopefully we'll get to a place where we can have a relatively static group of staff working on projects and have a better handle on it than we do today.
Great. And we can weigh all that in the normal budget process. But for now, I think, like I say, we don't get the opportunity too often to hear the CAO's office recommend increases, so that's good, and especially when those increases are going to allow us to expedite $250 million of investment in local economic activity and transportation infrastructure that's going to keep people safer. So it sounds like a pretty good deal to me. But if you can just verify back, since there isn't a CAO analysis in here, I just wanted to find out, as we do with all of our grant-funded issues, we're going to want to know whether there is an indirect cost to the general fund, and if so, whether that can be reimbursed.
One of the issues that we ran into in recent years was the reimbursement of related costs to the general fund, which is what you're referring to. And we won't know until we get through to the end of these projects how much related costs will actually be reimbursed to the city. A lot of the grants that the staff are working on have related costs eligible, reimbursable, but they don't actually know how much they'll end up receiving until we get to the end of the project. So having said that, it's kind of hard to give you an exact analysis, but what I can tell you is that we're working with the department to try and set up a procedure inside the department so that when those receipts come back in, the staff know what to do with them and immediately can do something with them. And so that they can give us a better sense of what's due to the general fund, what's due to Prop C or Measure R, and can make those transfers in a timely fashion and try to avoid the cumulative surprise that we had a couple years ago.
Great. Thank you.
I'll echo Mr. Krikorian's first comment and leave it at that. The CAO is recommending some hiring in this area that's badly needed. The only thing I'd add is I agree with Ms. Norton that we need even more, but I'm happy to see what we have, and of course I'll support it.
Great. So without objection, the committee will recommend approval. I am going to request, though, anytime you come forward seeking authorization for new grant opportunities, that you attach with that the 5-year forecast and an explanation of how the new grant would work into that.
Great.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is it, colleagues. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.